This is Scary Campfire Stories, which is a strange title I came up with. So I am joined by Alex North, who's
Hey, hello.
the Shadow Friend, Kaz Tudor, whose latest book is The Burning Girls,
Hello.
Ward, who has just released The Last House on Needless Street. So the whole idea behind this is that we all kind of write books that are tinged with horror. I think is suffice to say that. I did it with the Bonekeeper, the Six, and the Game. Alex North, whose name I will remember throughout this and not the name. And Catriona, who's came burst onto the scene with the Chalkman. And Catriona Ward, The Last House on Needless Street, which is one of my favourite books I've read this year. I absolutely adored it. And I think she knows this because I kept telling her. And I kept telling Miranda, her editor, as well. I've always loved books that kind of do cross genres. And I don't know if that's the same for everyone else, but we'll go around. And you can ask questions, by the way, in the Q&A part. Everyone should know that already. Down the bottom. But chat away to your heart's content in the chat. So let's start with you, Alex. So I know you're a horror fan, but I mean, that kind of cross-genre type of thing, is that something that you've interested in, and that's why you've kind of approached it in this way?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was growing up, I read all the kind of the modern classics. You know, Stephen King, obviously, Dean Koontz, Ramsey Campbell, Clive Barker, all that kind of thing. I was like a real horror fan, and then, you know, as I got older, cross-genre stuff definitely came to the fore. Like they call it slipstream back then, kind of a lot, you know. And there were people like Michael Marshall Smith, who I know. Yes, I know you're a huge fan. You know, we both are. Michael Marshall Smith, Graham Joyce, you know, people like that. People who kind of muddied the waters and kind of blurred the edges between genres, because I just found that stuff really, really interesting. And when I started, like, my terrible first attempts at writing, which I did very, very young, I kind of tried to do that as well, until eventually my first book, which was not The Whisper Man, in a different life, I published, you know, under a different name. And my first book was this weird mix of, it's awful, by the way, don't seek it out, but it's a weird mix of science fiction and horror and crime, and you know, I just submitted it not knowing what it was. It was this weird mixture of stuff. And there was a crime promotion happening at that point. And so it got published as part of that. And from that point on, I was a crime writer. But I've always kind of tried to drag little bits of horror and little bits of, not the supernatural necessarily, but just kind of a little bit, my work has always been a little bit off kilter. And so I've always kind of liked drawing from other genres to an extent. Horror in terms of some of the content, and maybe sort of some of the approach from other genres and things like that. But I mean, it's you know, it's all there to play with, I think. You know, I don't think you need to constrain yourself in that way. I mean, if you can borrow stuff and techniques and things from other genres, you should absolutely go for it, because that's how you know, create an interesting new thing, hopefully.
I agree with that, and but I disagree with you on your Facebook, because
it's awful, Luca. I can't bear it.
It's really not.
I thought it sounded brilliant. I definitely want to seek it out now. But I mean, if you
then maybe you want to read it.
I'm going to tell them what it's called and everything.
No. As far as I'm concerned, my earlier career starts with the third book.
Honestly,
the first two are dead to me.
But I think this is the thing: is I don't think you can ever judge your own work, and I think that was one of the first ones I read from you, and I loved it. So don't. You know,
I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't insult people that like it. But it's
denigrate my reading.
No, exactly. No, I'm being very, very rude, not just about myself, but the people that like it. Yeah. I think it's like something Val said, you know, years and years and years ago, was that your first book you spend lots and lots of time doing. You have loads and loads of time. Then your second book, your difficult second book, you have to do very, very quickly. And it's not really until your third book, perhaps, that you begin to start feeling much more confident about your voice. And I think it would, way back then with my third book, it was like, yeah, okay, this is the kind of thing, I kind of get it now, what I want to do. The first two, I was all over the place.
But Kaz, I mean, with the Chalkman, was that something that had, like, you know, you'd spent a long time thinking about, and you kind of approached that in a different way than Alex? Is that you kind of knew straight away what you wanted to do?
I mean, I think I was similar to Alex, probably in a way. It's just that I didn't get a break with anything. I mean, I spent sort of 10 years trying to get published with similar sort of stuff, and it was always this kind of horror thriller kind of mashup. But I guess I was told by an agent who took me on several years before The Chalkman, and that it didn't work out, that because I wanted to write this weird horror thriller mashup, and they kept trying to steer me towards straight crime, that what I wanted to write wasn't publishable. That mashup was not publishable. And they may well have been right at the time, I think, and then perhaps the environment or what the publishing industry was looking for changed perhaps. So I didn't change necessarily what I wrote. I'd always sort of wanted to write something. I'm a huge fan of Michael Marshall Smith as well. So I was hugely influenced by him. I loved John Connolly as well, who kind of did that again, a similar kind of thriller, mystery, horror, kind of combined those genres. And of course, I grew up reading Stephen King and James Herbert. So I always liked those elements. But, my first introduction sort of to books, adult books, was probably Agatha Christie. So I always loved a good mystery. And I guess I just liked the idea of combining those. And with The Chalkman was really, I think, as I said before, my kind of homage to all those things I loved as a teenager. So it was a big love letter to Stephen King and, films like The Goonies and The Lost Boys and that whole teenagers getting into the adventures type of stuff. But I'd always thought for ages, why can't someone write a book like this and set it in the UK? And that's just what I set out to do, really. And I was lucky by that point, I think, when I submitted that, because it wasn't a huge change from what I was writing before. That I think perhaps the environment or what people were looking for had changed. I mean, Stranger Things had just been out. I hadn't actually seen it at the time, but I think sometimes you just kind of luck out a bit on maybe what editors and agents are looking for, because there is, I think, a huge amount of luck with getting published. I think there are lots of, probably brilliant writers who are unpublished, and it's not due to lack of talent, it's opportunity, and there is a degree of timing and luck, I think, as well.
Now, Catriona, it's incredibly difficult to kind of sum up what The Last House on Needler Street is. I can't wait to read it. It's so good, and
I've been raving about it to people, and they're like, "What's it about?" And it's like,
you can't say. It's about stuff. It's really. I mean, what I'm interested then is. Did you go into writing that book with any kind of preconceived idea about what it was going to be, if you could even fit it into a genre, or was it something that a publisher kind of said, it's a bit like this, it's a bit like that, or is it just the story for you?
No, I just knew I came at it from a place where I think I'd been writing. I'm so sorry. Can you hear that? Someone's just started drilling. I'm going to move. They literally just started drilling outside the window. So bear with me.
Now this is the gloriousness of Zoom.
This is a live event, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. All right. So
I feel like I'm getting like it's a right move type of tour around this. So this is the kitchen.
This is the kitchen.
It's like a found footage horror.
It's lovely. I felt like I'm going to get somebody to stand this on as well. I felt like I came at it from a more of a gothic angle. Yeah. So, like my first two novels, they seem to have stopped now, but I'm going to move anyway. My first two novels, which were like a ghost story and a sort of a mystery about a cult where there was a mass murder, and they were very influenced by things like Shirley Jackson and those kind of like more gothic narratives. Gonna shut the door. I think I'm reacting well to this in real time. But so it was like I felt that when I was coming out of those two books, they, I think Little Eve sold like minus copies. So I get my royalty statements. And I'm like, I owe them money.
We've all been there.
Right? So I think it was quite a low point personally as well. Like I had some illness in the family, and I just ended my really long major relationship. And there just does come a point where you move stuff out of the way, in order to make room for other stuff. And I just thought, if I don't write what I really want to write now, like this is the time, because there's not much to lose really. Like it's it's not like I've got a career to ruin. It's just, this is the time to write the thing that doesn't fit on a shelf. And I think that almost that gave me the freedom to do it really. I I knew it wouldn't. I knew it was a weird book. Put it that way. I really did. And I just thought, but it completely. You know what it's like. It just burned in me. And I knew I had to write it. And I thought, and I couldn't take any notice of things like genre, because I think it's got, you know, there's that thing they say about the Gothic, which I think is true of horror as well, which is it's not really a genre, but more like a virus that attaches itself to things and mutates as needed. And I think that in Needham Street there's all sorts of Gothic and horror elements, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy to shelve, and indeed it hasn't proved to be. But I really, I was determined to write it, but I was also determined to use, like, again, very difficult to talk about this without giving anything away, but like, I was determined to use the conventions of horror to do what I think horror does really well, which is actually invoke compassion, if that makes sense. Because I don't think you can have horror without compassion. Actually, how are you afraid of something if you don't care? So that was my main thought on that.
That's that. I think it's like a character study, isn't it? In that sense, it's like it kind of hangs itself on being in that person's head for that length of time. Yeah. It kind of, you know, because people will get to the cat bit and make a decision very quickly.
Yes.
But for me, it was like, if you are already invested, then it's Kaz, that's not a spoiler. I swear to you, that's not a spoiler.
that's the second chapter, I think.
That's literally like, you're fine. But you do get invested very quickly, and I think that you're completely correct. Horror does that, I think, and is not normally given credit for it. Is that the best horror is about character? I mean, that's why I've always contended Stephen King's novels are so long. Is that when he has a big cast of characters, he wants you to be invested in every single one, and that takes time to do that. Because we'll talk about like our journey to, like, you know, having an interest in that. Mine started at 10. Well, it was even earlier than 10. My dad had the I've got it now. It's over there somewhere, but it's the complete and uncut edition of The Stand from like the 1990-91 version. And he had it in his room, and it was like the only book. And I was a massive, voracious reader, but I was reading like Enid Blyton and things like that. And I saw this book, and it was like a challenge, and I wanted to read it. And my dad was like, "No, you're not allowed to. You can't read that because, you know, you're 9, and that would be. I'm certain I would. That's wrong." And I pestered him, and then one day I think he just wasn't paying attention, and he just went, "Yeah, go ahead." So at 10 years old, I read The Stand. And it blew my tiny little mind that you know, and that was it then. I read everything I could get up my hands on, and it was, you know, paying off librarians to give me access to the adult section, which, you know, in council estates, you don't really care anyway. But that was like the horror for me then was like all I read. And it wasn't until I got to my 20s that I started reading crime. So it only made sense that after I'd spent a few years doing police procedurals and got the chance to do a standalone, I mixed the two together because that's kind of what I wanted to do anyway. But that love of horror never left me, because I always felt it was like the kind of the most purest way of looking at character, of like just putting them in the worst situation where you can't even understand what kind of situation you're in either. It can't be explained. So Alex, what was your journey towards the love of horror? What were you reading before you read your first horror novel?
Well, I was thinking about this obviously on the run up to this panel, and I've actually found a couple of things. Like these are not particular. Well, the first one is not particularly scary. Maybe some people remember this and some people don't. But this is my original childhood copy of Haunted House, which is a wonderful pop-up book, which I think is like the first book that I ever owned. Look at this.
That's amazing.
And there's all these little things you can pull. You can make ghosts appear in it and everything. So this is like one of my most treasured possessions. But I was thinking about this, and what I remember giving me nightmares in childhood. I don't know if you've ever read Struwwelpeter by Heinrich Hoffmann, and it's like 10 short stories, very, very short stories. They're poems, cautionary tales for children, and So hang on a second, let me see. Is the thing about it is the illustrations, which are just absolutely horrific. And I don't know if this will come through on Zoom, but this is the story of Harriet, who plays with matches, and as you can see, burns to death.
Wow.
And that's it. That's the story. She plays with matches and burns to death. But my favourite, like the one that stayed with me, is the story of Conrad, who's a poor little boy. He sucks his thumb, and his mother warns him. And I remember reading this as a kid. Warns him not to, because the long-legged tailor will come and get him. And on the next page, here we go. The long-legged tailor comes in and cuts his fucking thumbs off. And that's it. He's just standing there at the end without any thumbs. And his mum just comes in and is completely unsurprised. She thinks he deserves it because he shouldn't have been sucking his thumbs. So I remember having this, like, as a kid, not that edition, and reading those and being absolutely kind of traumatized. And I grew up in this, not an old Victorian mansion. It was, but it was divided into 4 flats. So it was really kind of drab and grim. And we just had one long corridor that was very, very dark with rooms coming off it and very, very high ceilings. And, you know, I remember kind of lying awake at night with the door half open onto the dark corridor and just imagining somebody bursting in and coming in and getting me. And, you know, my parents would have to leave the light on at night. And even that wouldn't quite reach the corners of the rooms because it was so tall. But yeah, that kind of thing. I've always been I was a very, very scared child. I don't get scared by anything very much as an adult. You know, films, TV, books, I don't get scared. Yeah, I'll jump, but I don't get scared by very much. But as a kid, I was absolutely petrified. And it's, you know, obviously you're formed by the things that you read.
That's so interesting. Kaz, what was it for you? Was you, Stephen? I imagine you were a Stephen King fan.
But I was just nodding at some of the stuff Alex was saying there. It's a bit like listening to myself talk about things, because I was also just such a scared child. And it was the same thing, that door slightly open and then the light had to be on. And I used to have to arrange my like teddy bears either side of me, like they were guarding me. Cover had to be right over my head.
Yeah.
You all know that's what keeps you safe from the monster. And I was just terrified of everything. And my first sort of scary books were ones I got from the library, I remember as well. There was one, I think it was Hamlin's Book of True Ghost Stories. I haven't got a copy now because it would have been a library book. And it was quite a big book, and it had this kind of like ghouly thing on the front with like the chains and stuff. But it was because it was supposed to be true stories. I think that's what scared me even more, because I couldn't go, oh, they're just made up stories. So I would read all these ghost stories that were supposed to be true and scare myself absolutely shitless, basically. And I don't know why I did it, because I used to have awful, awful nightmares. And my mum would be like, oh, you mustn't read that book. And I'd be like, no, it's nothing to do with the book. It's nothing to do with the book.
Don't take away the scary book.
Still went back to it. And I used to read all these sort of things and these scary stories. I remember one, bizarrely, I remember one about this girl ghost who was on fire, haunting this woman in this room. I can't remember the name of it now. And another one where a woman had this mark on her face that just started to grow and disfigure her, and they were all horrible stories and really scary, especially when I was about 8 or 9. So that kind of, but I don't know why, there was an attraction to it still. It scared me to death, but I was still really attracted to reading these scary stories in between sort of reading Agatha Christie's and stuff. So I sort of got a bit older, and I guess I followed that through then to when I started reading Stephen King, which actually, you know, compared to some of these like ghost stories, was probably pretty tame. I think, to be honest.
I don't think you ever get as scared, perhaps, as you were as a child. You know,
because it was, it would prey upon my mind. But I actually still get scared now, stupidly. And it's the same silly sort of stupid things. If I have to go out here in the dark to the bin at night in the dark, I will still momentarily think, what if a zombie just came out of the garden now? I still think, it still occurs to me that I could grab that bit of wood and perhaps stab them. So it's still there.
Do you plan your exits from like?
It does occur to me if there was a zombie attack, particularly if you've got like big glass windows at the front of the house.
Yeah,
we'd have to have the blinds down and stuff, and we could get out the back door maybe though. Or we could climb out of that window. Yeah, so there's always, I think, this is why I think all horror writers are prepared for any apocalypse, because we've been working on that for a while.
We will survive.
Yeah.
But Catriona, what was you reading? I mean, like I read earlier that you moved around quite extensively during growing up. I mean, that must have some kind of effect, I imagine, psychologically on like that feeling of kind of, you know, being balanced.
I think it did. I was a very neurotic child. Well, I remain quite a neurotic person, but like a very neurotic child. And especially we lived in Madagascar, and Madagascar's sort of nominally Christian, but it's actually very like voodoo is its main sort of. They don't bury people. They mummify them and entomb them, and they have this thing called la retournement, which is where so the head of the family is the head of the family no matter whether they're dead or alive. They remain the head of the family. When they save up, and the family saves up enough money, they have a huge party and get the head of the family out and put them at the head of the table. And then they have this 3-day party where they just toast each other and have a really good time with the corpse at the head of the table. And you can see they have a big parade through the streets first. So you quite often see in Madagascar deceased persons being carried aloft, you know, on chairs with lots of singing and dancing. It's not at all sad. It's like it's real moment of celebration. So yeah, I guess that might have made its way into my imagination somewhat. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, what I tended to read weirdly was things like and I was terrified by these, but things like Watership Down, which I think is a truly frightening book. I don't know how people think it's for children, really, just to a certain degree. It's and I loved there was stories about wild animals and about the savagery of nature, and I think that was a sort of in a way that did for me then what reading horror does for me now, is it provides a sort of a soothing alternative that gives you the fear reflex, but it's not the sort of actual thing you're afraid of. Because I was terrified of ghosts and terrified of everything supernatural. I slept up with the light on until well into my teens. It was just, you know you're wrong, but you just might not be, you know. So I used to read a lot of that, and then obviously the first sort of proper, I think, grown up ghost story I read was The Monkey's Paw, which is you know what I'm talking about, which is where two parents use the monkey's paw to wish alive again the dead son, and then they realize as the knock comes up the door what they may have. It's like an early Pet Cemetery, basically.
Yeah.
That's what it was influenced, wasn't it? I think
Yeah.
Stephen mentioned. Yeah, but I was going to talk about that as well, because it remains one of my favorite short stories.
Because it's so persuasive emotionally.
Yeah.
And you've got all these images of these sort of the simian face of the monkey that's seen through the fire, and it's really powerful. So but I graduated from that onto Shirley Jackson, and I felt like I think I read The Haunting of Hill House in my late teens. Still way too early, in my opinion. That shit is scary, and I remember reading it on a sunny morning, like lying in bed, as you do. Like on a Saturday morning, it's like a treat. You get to lie in bed. You like lie in bed and you read a book. And I've never been so frightened in the broad, shining daylight. As I think it was that scene of whose hand was I holding? I was paralyzed, and I couldn't understand how the normal world was still going on around me as I was reading this. It just seemed so disconnected to the power of the narrative. So I read a lot of different kinds of things, but I think it's always been, the tendency has always been discernible.
I think it says something about us though, that we kind of, even if we are scared by something, we still do want to return to it as children. Is that like, this is invoking some kind of fear response in me, but don't take it away from me, as Kaz was saying earlier about like, no, it's not the book.
Yeah.
Why do we still want to go back to it then? Because I remember I used to actively try and find things that scare me. It's like, and I still do that now. It's like my favorite thing to do is to go on roller coasters, because there's two things that really scare me, and that's roller coasters and snakes. That's pretty much it. But and it's much harder to find snakes in England, so I go to Alton Towers instead, because it's that kind of feeling of loss of control. It's like if I fly out of Nemesis now, I'm gone. So I do that constantly because I want to be scared. Is that the same kind of thing that the fiction is doing to it, Alex? I mean, like, do you actively want to feel that feeling?
Yeah, no, I mean, when I was saying that I don't get very scared as a grown-up, I mean, I want to be, and I do try and seek it out. You know, we have a horror film night once a week, and I'm desperately searching for something that evokes the same kind of sensations that I got as a kid. And I don't know whether it's possible to do that as a grown-up, but I keep looking. But absolutely, as a kid, definitely. And some of the kind of scariest things were things that you did have to seek out, that had that kind of slightly forbidden aspect to them. I remember, because I'm a lot older than you, Luca, watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre when it was banned, and a group of us had to kind of search out a cassette, which was like a copy of a copy of a copy, which, you know, when one of our parents was out, we snuck around and we put it on and we all sat and watched it, and we're kind of sort of scared out of our minds. But it was almost the experience of this sort of transgressive material that you shouldn't be having, you shouldn't be watching, rather, that kind of added the thrill to it. But as a grown-up, I think it's much harder. I mean, I can jump at something, but it's very rare that something actually deeply disturbs me as a grown-up, but I'm still drawn to find it. I think what I value more is, you know, like Catriona was saying, the compassion. Often I'm more interested in the emotion that you get from a horror film or from a scary story. I think that's, you know, I'm much more interested in being moved almost by horror than scared by it, because I've kind of accepted I'm not really going to be scared. So I want a kind of depth of character. I want a kind of depth of meaning to it. You know, I want to come away moved, maybe jumping along the way, kind of.
Kaz's t-shirt has reminded me of something from when I was younger, and I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, and there's a scene where she's in the bed and like the hands come out from that's still, I still try not to think about that.
But if you watch it now, it's ridiculous. It's just not scary at all. But it's scary when you're a kid, you know, or when you're younger. You know?
I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like that kind of, like, you know, you're trying to replicate that the feelings that you get when you were younger. It's like some kind of, like, you know, wanting to relive the past. Is that something like that you do with Kaz with your type of stuff? Is that what you're trying to do? Especially the Chalk Man was very much like, as you were saying, the Goonies, that kind of feel. Is that you trying to, like, you know, get something back from the childhood?
I guess it was, in a way. I mean, those things didn't necessarily scare me as a kid. I mean, I still get scared by stuff. I'm actually, bizarrely, an absolute wuss with scary films. I remember watching The Ring, and every time I went to bed, I kept thinking the girl with the hair, and I'm really freaked out by creepy kids. I mean, I've got a little girl now, actually, but creepy kids. There was, I've talked about this before, you know this, Luke, don't you? My favourite little mini scary chill stories was something that someone posted on Reddit. You know the one I'm talking about? To tell it quickly now. So basically, it was the challenge was to write a really chilling story in about a paragraph and a few sentences. And somebody posted, a father goes into his son's bed to tuck him in to say goodnight. And his little boy's lying in the bed, and he says to him, Daddy, I'm scared. There's something under the bed. Dad says, oh, don't be silly. Of course, there's nothing under the bed, but I'll check for you just to prove you're perfectly fine. So he looks under the bed and finds his son curled up there, terrified. And he says, Daddy, I'm scared. There's something in my bed.
That'll do it.
You imagine looking up what the hell's in the bed. And it's that creepy kid vibe, isn't it? And you know, just after I'd read that, someone had posted that. It was when Betty was really quite small still. And we had a baby monitor and put her to bed as per normal. And I was early hours of the morning or something, and I had this noise coming from the bedroom, and it was like the creepiest laughter you could do. It sounded really creepy through the baby monitor. And I couldn't see her in the bed, because she'd like curled up at one end of the cot or something. And I was like, oh my God, what's that? And it turned out it was just some toy that had this really weird laughing sound that had gone off laughing. But in the early hours, and you've got this fuzzy baby monitor and you can't see your child, you hear this demonic laughter. It was quite terrifying. So
have you seen those stories of people hacking baby monitors and talking to the child? That's that's nightmare fuel.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah. So I have the capacity, I think. I can still get quite scared and freaked out by things, and my head can sort of go. And it seems, silly sometimes, but I think there's certainly a creepy kid vibe. If I watch something, particularly a film or something with creepy kids, it will still sort of freak me out. I think there was a zombie movie or a zombie series, wasn't there, with a small zombie child coming into the bedroom or something. I can't quite remember what it was from now. But again, I caught some glimpse of it or a trailer or something. And again, it really freaked me out. I'm pretty, I can still be really scared. So I don't know, perhaps I've just not grown out of it.
Catriona, do you try and scare yourself with this type of stuff? Do you try? You actively
I try
sort
not
out?
to. No, I'm still terrified of everything. I think I go to these books. I go to these books because there's a sort of almost an inoculating function about it. Like if I can read this and I can feel this and I'm still here, then that means that maybe tonight, whatever is under my bed won't get me. There's a sort of like, if you look it in the face, it's maybe like a vaccination. I've got vaccination in the brain right now. I think everyone does, but like I think there is a sort of kind of recuperative thing about it, whereby you're like, I think the author and the reader are sharing what they're scared of, and you're reaching out through the page and saying, I'm absolutely fucking terrified of this. Are you too? And if you are, then you go through the journey together, and it becomes that cathartic thing, which I think can be a bit reassuring and healing, because there are rules in books where there aren't rules in life, and that makes them much safer, and it means there's a way of experiencing those feelings where you don't have the chaotic real life kind of arbitrariness of events. I lived all over the world, but when we used to come back to this house on Dartmoor every summer, and when I was about 13, I would go to sleep in my room, and I'd wake up with a hand in the small of my back just pushing me out of bed. I'd land on the floor, I could feel every finger of the hand. I could feel the force. And it was also that thing of, when there's someone else in the room with you, it's not about hearing them or them breathing. You just know, you can sense their presence. I just knew there was someone in the room. And it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Like, it doesn't have any relative in the daylight world. It's the kind of fear that it's that childlike fear that you're talking about, Alex. That it's just I don't know if you get back. But it was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, and I still get what this experience is, but they're. We didn't have Google back then, and I think it probably would have helped because it's called a hypnagogic hallucination, and it happens on the very edge of sleep. But I didn't know that. How would I have known that? I didn't know that, and I never told my parents or anyone, because it's just there's something almost shameful about feeling that depth of feeling. There's something almost private about it because it's so intense. So it was this huge kind of that sort of, when I started to write, that was I think probably the deepest feeling I'd ever had. So that's probably why it came out like that. I'm still really frightened, but I've just learned to breathe through it a bit more, I think.
The thing for me with like going to sleep, and it scared the life out of me the first time it happened, but I've suffered from, it's called exploding head syndrome, which is the weirdest thing. It's like you are just falling asleep, and then there's like, you hear an explosion in your ears. It's like a boom, like that. And it's called exploding head syndrome. It's just some weird thing that happens when you go to sleep. The first time it happened to me, I was convinced that the world had ended, and like I was the only one left. So I had to go around at 1 o'clock in the morning, just go and check in on everyone and see if they're all still awake. Are you still there? Because I was convinced of it. But I know, Alex, you've talked about this before. It's like the kind of like the lucid dreaming thing, and Shadow Friend has got a lot of that in there, that kind of dream thing. Do you think a lot of the experiences we feel with fear comes from like those kind of states where we're not totally conscious, not totally unconscious?
Wow, that's quite a deep question, Luke.
It is, isn't it? I practiced it in the mirror this morning.
Pulled it off with a straight face. Brilliant. Well, I don't know if they come from there, but I think when we are in that kind of sort of, there is that kind of dreamlike place between sleep and wakefulness, and lots of horrible things can happen there, like Catriona was talking about, and obviously sleep paralysis can be incredibly sort of terrifying as well. You know, if you don't know what's going on. But I think it's probably less likely that things stem from there, but we're in the kind of state there where our subconscious has a chance to bubble up, I think. And you know, the things that we're afraid of and the things that are going on below the surface have a chance to come out, I think, and manifest themselves in that way. I mean, dreams, you know, I mean, we don't dream at random. We dream things based on our life. They may not make much sense, and they may look like our real lives have been, and the things that we've seen and experienced have been sort of shattered and put together at very weird angles and everything. But you know, they don't just come from nowhere. They are jigsaws drawn together from everything that we've experienced, and they're things that have kind of latched on below the surface and stuck with us. You know, and sometimes they can be more bizarre and weird than others, but sometimes, you know, they can be sort of strangely revealing, perhaps. So I don't think that that's where things come from. I'm not sure if that was quite your question, but I think it's an excellent state to kind of look at those things and perhaps learn stuff about yourself and the kind of things that interest you and scare you.
Kaz, have you ever used any of your nightmares in your books?
I'm trying to think, actually. Not specifically, but I do think the things feed through, don't they? Or more likely, you know, in a way, your dreams perhaps reflect what you're worrying about and thinking about. Talking about what Catriona was saying, but I remember when my friend and I used to share this house in Nottingham, and we both used to have this same dream. And I think, you know, you feed off each other. It's very easy to say we had the same dream, but, you know, perhaps someone mentioned it first, sort of thing. But I think it's a similar thing, that sensation that there's somebody sitting on the bed and you're absolutely convinced, you feel that weight sitting on the bed and you can feel it and you don't dare move, and it feels so real. And, you know, we had this idea that it was this figure in this hood or something. And I think, unfortunately, but, you know, I don't think we actually dreamt it separately. I think perhaps somebody mentioned it first, and then we kind of convinced ourselves that we both had the same dream of somebody sitting on the bed. But it did freak us out a bit. We became kind of convinced there was something in this house. But, you know, on the other hand, it might have been, you know, too many vodka and Diet Cokes. You know, who knows? Not very real at the time. But I think that vulnerable, you're very vulnerable, aren't you, when you're sort of falling asleep, you're half asleep, and things take on a different significance. They just do. It's a primal thing, isn't it? Things take on a different significance in the dark. You know, sound or something that you can identify in the daytime, or go, it's that. You hear a strange sound in the night, and it's just much more freaky. It's much more scary, and you're very vulnerable when you're asleep in bed. I mean, I've been woken up by convinced I've heard like a noise or someone downstairs, and then laying awake there for ages. And it starts off with me thinking, in the kind of like typical sense, it's probably a burglar, and that's scary enough. And then my mind goes somewhere else, and I'm convinced that there could be any sort of monster lurking downstairs. So I think it's that sort of your mind's a little bit more open, it's wandering around, and you're just a bit more vulnerable to being scared at that point. But, you know, I've always said it's not irrational to be scared of monsters or scared of the dark or any of those things. It's perfectly sensible. It's a primal thing, isn't it? I'm scared of stuff you can't see, what's lurking in the dark when you're most vulnerable, falling asleep.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like a lost control. I know I can do it to myself. So if I am like going to bed at night and I leave the lights on that's in the furthest point of the room, I turn that off, and then I've got to get out of the room. I can do it to myself, where I think there's something behind me, and like all of a sudden you start walking very quickly. Well, Catriona, can you do it? Do you think you can do it to yourself, or do you think it's like just one of those things where it just can kind of pop up type of thing?
I think also, I mean, another thing that really frightens me, which is less exterior but more about, if you're talking about monsters, like I think perhaps this is why I quite obsessively reflect on this in my books, is like those tiny incremental steps that you go through to make you into the monster, you know, what comes from within. And I think sleeping as well is there's something about maybe the subconscious being so present and just behind the thin skin, you know, where you can just touch it, and things that are supposed to be buried deep come up. And I think those two ideas for me are quite linked, whereby, you know, you take someone, I don't know whether it's someone who's either a serial killer or a more supernatural monster. There's a process that gets them there. You know, they didn't start out like that, and certainly no one intends to turn, well, with exceptions, but most people don't intend to turn out as a monster. So it doesn't go from A to Z, does it? It goes from A to B to C, to very, very small incremental steps whereby people are led, you know, down these paths to find the monster within. Like, I think that's a very powerful idea for me. It's like, what would it take to make, you know, me into something with that, you know, to open up that darkness, and that, I think, is a very potent idea.
I don't think it's never that far away. I've said that before. I think we've got that capability to do something absolutely terrible.
I get that from you, yeah. I'm joking. I'm joking. Sorry.
They're smiling happily.
It's true, you know. I mean, it's a circumstance, isn't it? If we happen to have been born in some kind of war-torn country, you know, anything, you know, there's a thin veneer separating you from bad behavior, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of the reductive nature of saying someone was born evil is just doesn't really explain everything to me that goes in that kind of process.
It's tedious, you know. I mean, I don't believe in evil like as a supernatural force, but I think it's a useful word to describe acts that people do, because we need some kind of word for that. But to describe the people as that is incredibly reductive and almost, you know, it's almost cowardly, I think. And I think this is maybe one of the differences between the crime genre and horror, in a way, in that horror, you can have evil, you can have monsters that are unexplained, whereas a good crime fiction, you are always going to be looking at those steps. You're always going to be approaching it from an attempt to understand how somebody got to be that way, which is, you know, the opposite of just reducing somebody to evil. I mean, that's just sweeping things under the carpet, isn't it? It's not I don't think that's a very grown-up way of looking at the world, just to go, oh, somebody's born evil. I mean, you don't see an evil baby, do you? I've never seen an evil baby. They're all, you know, they're all evil.
Let me show you some photographs. Well, I mean, the questions are coming in, and I will get to them shortly. But before we do, I think we should. You can either answer this with like the scariest story you've ever heard or told, and I think Kaz has already mentioned this. But what about something that scared you enough to write about it, or something that you've done while you're writing a book that scared you? So I'll tell you mine straight away. Was when I wrote The Bone Keeper, it's set. The beginning of the book is in a woods that is quite near my house, and I went through it during the day and to you know, go over it and say like, well, this is what it looks like, and this, like, you know, I'm writing down like a tree, you know, like that kind of thing. But I thought, I'm not going to get this totally right if I don't do this when it's dark, because that's what happens in the book. So it gets to dark, and in the middle of this forest there's a tunnel, which is what plays a significant part of the opening of the book. So I thought, I've got to walk through this tunnel in the dark to get the full experience of what this will feel like for someone, for a character in the book. So it's pitch black. I get to the tunnel, no light whatsoever, and I start walking through, and about a third of the way into it, I hear a noise ahead of me. And I'm thinking, well, this was a terrible idea. But I thought, no, I've got to keep going. It's just my imagination. And as I get to like the middle, I noticed that there are two forms in front of me. And there's like one here and there's one here. And I'm thinking, yep, definitely dead. This is how it's going to happen. But for some reason, I kept going and I kept walking towards the cover. And it's not until I was about 5 meters, 10 meters away, the second form all of a sudden stands up. And then two very surprised teenage faces, late teens, early 20s, hurry past me. And it turns out I had interrupted someone having some fun, basically. And I then became the scary person in their story. But that moment, I kept walking forward. I didn't stop. I didn't run away. I just kept going because I just accepted this is how I'm going to die. I may as well just keep going. I've not done that since. I went to America last year in Connecticut to research my next book, and when it started getting dark at like 6:30, and I didn't go in any woods or anything like that. Mainly because over there they've got guns. So I just I just thought it's probably safer. But it has affected me moving forward, like researching books. Is that I probably won't do that kind of thing again, because it's just like, why put yourself in that kind of danger? Alex, have you got any kind of stories like that?
Well, Luca, a few years ago, I was in a tunnel, and it was. No. Oh God. Well, I mean, specifically with the Whisper Man, I suppose. Kaz was talking about scary children earlier on. My son is not scary; he's lovely. But there was a time, the house that we're in now, we've been in for quite a while. But when we first moved in, he was probably about sort of 5, something like that, 4 or 5, and he was in the front room playing by himself one day. And kids are kind of talking to themselves and everything, and he was messing around with toys. And I was in the kitchen, and for some reason, I kind of I came back to him and said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just playing with the boy on the floor." And so,
Brilliant.
that was, well, I was kind of shivery, there's a shiver went up, but actually I kind of thought, that's pretty good. Actually, I like that. I'll keep that. And the boy on the floor never returned, and he doesn't remember it. And we never dug up the floorboards to see see what was going on. But yeah, so that was kind of like a momentary chill. But I kind of like it when scary stuff like that happens, because in the moment, it's not very nice, and it might be a bit creepy. But afterwards, kind of the writer part of your brain, the part that has that shard of ice, kind of like thinks, yeah, no, I can use that. I like that. Thank God there's something I don't need to make up.
Kaz, the chalk drawings and the chalk man, where do they come from?
I mean, they come from something very innocent, because but it was creepy, and it was great inspiration. Because when my little girl was 2, a friend for her 2nd birthday gave her this tub of coloured chalks, and what you do, we went out and started drawing on the driveway with them. But I remember she's very insistent. The only thing she wanted me to draw was stick figures. So she wanted me to draw all these weird stick figures, standing, walking, running, multicoloured stick figures, and to literally cover the driveway with these stick figures. But it was perfectly innocent. And then we went inside and had tea and forgot about it. And then later that night, I'd opened the back door to let the dog out about midnight or something, and the security light came on. And I'd completely forgotten about these chalk drawings. But as the light came on and illuminated them all in sort of the semi-dark, I thought, oh, Jesus Christ! It's just like they'd appeared from nowhere, and in that environment, it was suddenly really creepy. And then I turned around to my husband and went, "Geez, these chalk men look really creepy in the dark." And that was the sort of the ping moment. The chalk man became the chalk man. And I think there is that fine line, particularly with kids stuff, between something quite innocent and something very creepy. And the idea of an innocent childhood game that becomes very sinister when in the book these chalk figures seemingly start appearing on their own from this childhood game. And I think there is that fine line with stuff like that, with kids in particular, that kind of like the doll, dolls. I mean, dolls are so creepy. I mean, in my 2nd book, there was a doll who was called Abby Eyes.
Yeah.
That was based on something real life creepy, because my mum, when she was little, had an imaginary friend called Abby Eyes, which is just, it's just such a creepy name, isn't it? Why? So I like that fine line between something innocent and something very, very creepy.
Catriona, what about you? What do you have, like, any scary kind of things that have happened while researching a book? Or, I mean, it must have been quite difficult against that kind of dark frame of mind for that character and Needless Street as well, like.
Yeah, I think Needless Street tested me more than most. I don't want to spoil it for people, so I don't want to say too much. But just shaking violent shakes of head. But there was something that there is an event which has these reverberations of it in Needless Street, which I found It's always had this kind of really cold grip on my brain, which is the Lake Sammamish murders. I don't know if we know these. So it's I think it was 1974 on Memorial Day. I think it was Memorial Day. Ted Bundy took two women, Denise Nasland and Janice Ott, from the crowded lakeshore in the blazing sunshine. There were literally thousands of people there, thousands. And they were found I think 2 or 3 months later on a hillside a couple of miles away in a very decomposed state. And just you're supposed to be safe in the sunshine, you know? You're supposed to be safe in the sunshine. You're supposed to be safe among people. They were with their families. He used his real name when he came up to them. He said, and everybody heard him talking to them. He tried it with 4 women who didn't go with him, but 2 did. And also I think it was Denise Nasland's mum who said about her, you know, she had a really kind nature. She was the kind of person who, you know, I was always afraid for her because she was too kind. So, and the ruse he used was to ask them, he had a fake cast on his arm, and he used that he asked them to move something. As far as we know, from the other women who it didn't work with, he asked them to move, like help carry something. So they died because they were kind. They died because they were helpful. And they died because they were trying to do a stranger a favor. And there's the way that they were found. Robert Keppel, I think, who was the investigator who eventually worked with Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer, was describing this discovery of the scene, whereby it was unlike any other scene that they'd known, because they had to do forensics in a very different way, because they had to. The wildlife had interfered so much with the recovery. So and one thing that he noticed was that all the birds' nests were woven with golden hair, and with dark hair, women's hair, basically. And he just remembers thinking, like, how long has this been going on that they learned to do that? You know, how long was this? How long did it take the birds to learn to make nests of human hair? And that is something which really run. It's a sort of event that runs. It's not a story about that, but that event runs underneath the street very much, because I find it absolutely, you know, backbreakingly terrifying.
Yeah, it's that real life horror that can kind of.
Yeah.
There's no kind of replacement for it, is there? It's like that kind of like real horror element to a story, and you go like, but that actually happened.
That actually happened, yeah. If you wrote it, you'd think, oh, it's a bit much, actually.
All right, so I'm going to go through some questions now. Casey Davis says, this last year has been quite horrific on so many levels. Will any of you incorporate the pandemic in future writings? I've had this issue writing in the past year, that everything that I kind of make up just doesn't kind of compare to what's going on outside the window. It's really difficult. Alex, will you be incorporating the pandemic? Are you just going to steer clear? I know I am. Are you going to steer clear of it?
I'm never say never, I guess. But I mean, I'm kind of luckier than many crime writers in that I write standalones. And so you can kind of move stuff around and set stuff at different times, or just set stuff in no time in particular. Yeah. You don't have to give a year for stuff. But I think it's probably much harder if you have a series detective going forward. And you are actually kind of doing it chronologically and setting it against real world events. Because one of the things that crime fiction does so well is, address social issues and deal with social issues. And, this is a huge one that's, exposed levels of inequality, all these different things. And so in a sense, it's kind of ripe for writing about on that level. But whether anybody's going to want to read about it, that's going to have to be kind of creative. And obviously, the really obvious scenarios kind of like sort of almost write themselves. So I think if you were going to do it, I don't know. You would have to find an unusual, an appealing take on it in some way, I think. Do something different with it. Whether you can just ignore it if you're writing realistic social crime fiction, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Kaz, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually, because I say that my books are standalones as well, and even ones set present, which we call it present day, I say they kind of exist in a parallel universe. So I don't necessarily want to wind in what's actually happening in real life into the books. They're kind of a little parallel universe of their own. And because you would have to make it kind of a thing of the book. I don't think you would just have it as a passing reference, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, you need to go all in for it. You can't just have it as a, you know, as part of it, as a backdrop to the story. It has to be an integral part of the book. It's interesting because I had an idea for, well, it's actually going to be book 6, and it's kind of a post-apocalyptic triple locked room mystery virus zombie thing. But this was before sort of COVID, but I'm kind of quite cool with it because, again, it's kind of parallel universe. It's not really focusing on the before, it's kind of an after thing, and it was an idea I'd had for a little while. I just thought I had a great I could do a great kind of twist thing with it, so that's probably going to be book 6. But as in writing about it realistically now, it's not something I'd want to tackle with my writing, but I think Alex is right. It does depend on the sort of fiction that you write, whether you want to make reference to it or not. I like to keep my books fairly not time specific. So, as I say, they're sort of in this little parallel universe, and they're not really relating to what's happening in the real world in a way.
Someone in the comment in the chat here says, I'm sick to death of non-stop waffling about COVID, and I think that's how I feel. Catriona, what are you like?
Yeah.
It's so in your face. It's like you want some escapism. Is that going to be the same for you moving forward?
Well, I think part of the, part of the problem with even when you do get to talk to people on Zoom or at a distance now, all we can talk about is a fucking pandemic. So it's a bit of like we need a new imaginative roads, you know, we need something else to take us out. Also, I think I agree with everything you were saying, CJ, about it being it would be very hard not to make it a book about the pandemic, and probably we don't know the end of the story yet, really.
Yes.
That's part of the problem, is it's very hard to contextualize it and be able to write about, because it also what an enormous triggering issue for the entire world. It's not like you can it's not like this is a sort of minor issue that that affected a couple of people. Every single person will have a very loaded experience of it. So I think you'd have to have something really strong to say about it. My instinct is I'm probably going to steer clear and just continue with the serial killers.
I did have an idea for like a serial killer who like, were just during lockdowns, so then started having to create pandemics themselves. So people would be locked down. It got too complicated and I shelved it. Because then it was like, well, how does it get, the lab and all that? It was just too complicated. I'll go with one more question from, let's go with Alex Hawley. For me, books are about atmosphere. What is it that horror needs to create that scary world when you are all writing it? And I think atmosphere is and characters you kind of relate to and are interested in. I think that's what we were all talking about earlier. Is that the same for you, Alex? Or?
Yeah, I mean, basically that's it. Atmosphere and characters. I mean, you really need characters to care about. Otherwise, there's no real horror. There's just action and violence or whatever. You need. I think you need somebody who you care about to be threatened, and you need to care about the outcome of the situation. Otherwise, there's no horror. There's just kind of, I don't know, monsters and gore and everything like that. So atmosphere and character and emotion.
Anything to throw in?
No, I was going to agree. You can't be tense. You can't be scared if you don't care about the characters you're reading about. Otherwise, you're just like, so they died. Yeah, they got killed on the series. But you've got to care about it. You've got to feel that. Oh God, are they going to get away? Are they going to? What's going to happen? So I'd agree entirely. That's key to the tension and the horror. Really, I think.
I think it's got to cost you something. It's got to cost the writer something, and it's got to cost the reader something in turn. And again, those as you will say, that's about caring about what happens to the people in the book.
Okay, Anna's got a great question to end on. What has everyone got coming next? So, Alex, what's up next for you? Oh, that was a painful look. That was a pained look. That's the pained look of a writer who doesn't know the answer to that question.
No. I mean, you know the answer to that question because we were talking before the panel. I'm kind of I'm working on a draft.
You'll get there.
And you know what it's like.
It's the same for everyone.
Yeah.
But I was always annoyed because when I speak to writers who have been in the business for longer than me, I thought, so it gets easier, doesn't it? And then they go, no, it doesn't. No. As you're on like book five will be your next one, won't it?
I've just finished the kind of first final draft. I'm on the polishing stage now, but oh my God, this has been an awful one to write. It's been very difficult for many reasons, both personal and practical, I think. But I'm on the final stages now. And hopefully something good will come out of it. You know, I'm at that stage where you finish something and go, I have no idea whether this is any good or not. Hopefully I can make it good. But it's as yet titleless, because we're still sort of talking about titles. But, you know, hopefully it'll all come together and, you know, be out and about this time next year. No, January maybe. So, yeah.
Catriona, what do you do to follow up that then? I mean, like, it's because it's one of those things that you can't shelve. What is the next? Is it going to be a similar type of thing?
Well, luckily I'd already written it when New Street came out. That, which I think is a really good move, because I don't know.
We all hate you. We all hate you. It's not enough that you wrote Need a Street.
It was my thing of like, well, Need a Street is clearly too absolutely batshit weird to sell, so I need something to follow up that will sell. And it didn't. It turned out quite that way. But it's called. It's coming out in March 2022 in the US and here. It's called Sundial, and it's about a mother and a daughter who go on a bonding trip to the Mojave Desert. Each of them secretly thinking that the other wants to kill them.
Ooh.
I love that. I can't wait. For me, it's a book that it's got a title, but I don't even know if it's the right title anymore. It's been 18 months, nearly 2 years trying to write it. It's a book that's half set in England, half set in America, about a guy who for 30 years has believed that his mother died, and that may not be the case. So he's going off to find out if that is the case or not. Or if it's Ghost. Woo! But no, just thank you everyone for coming along and supporting the festival. Next up, 4 o'clock is Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, I think it is. Yes, that was amazing memory for me there. But you can go and buy the books, 30% off at the link for Waterstones. Please do. These are all fantastic writers. Ignore my books. Go and buy theirs.
No, don't. Buy Luca's too, and thank you, Luca.
Thank you so much, Luca.
Thank you so much. This has been a brilliant. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Kaz. Thank you, Catriona. And I'll see you on soon, hopefully in the flesh. Bye-bye.